Okay, let's start. So, some announcements. So I posted the grades for homeworks 2 and 3. The grades for homeworks 4 and 5, I think, will be done over the weekend. I'm waiting for the TAs to do some amount of regrading. As you know, each time there is a homework assignment, I look at the various grades and the discrepancy in CodeGrader, and I select some assignments to be regraded. So I have to wait until that finishes. I think it will be done by they told me that they would do it by Friday, because there is quite a few cases actually of discrepancy. So they can be done a bit faster now. So I think this will be done by Friday, and so I think over the weekend we will have your grades for homeworks 4 and 5, okay? Today I will assign homework 6, which is for the homework track only, not for the project track, okay? And it will be this battleship homework I've been talking about. And I put up a form that you can use in order to tell us about grading mistakes. These are not the mistakes of the kind, I think there is one point that I should have had. So, but are major things such as, Professor, I told you that, you told me that because I zipped the file wrong, you would grade it separately, but you haven't uploaded your grade, or something like that, So this kind of sort of major hiccups. Having many students, I find it very difficult to keep track of everything via email. So I'm asking people essentially to use a form so that we have the list of things to fix, and we can check whether we have fixed them all or not. It's much easier for us to keep track. Okay, so the form is already posted on Piazza. What else? What are other announcements? I cannot think of any. Some people are asking when the final exam is. It's during the normal class scheduled final hours, which is Tuesday from 8 to 11 during finals week. And the project presentations are Wednesday from 12 to 3 and from 4 to 7. Okay? Everybody is welcome to attend them, but I reserved rooms that are only of size sufficient, essentially. I don't know, there are like 75 people rooms, each one of them. So if everybody comes to everything, there are going to be too many people, but we will see what we can do. There is a lot of pressure for rooms during finals week, of course, and so I try not to grab more space than I actually need in order to leave other classes also space. This is pretty much it. What I want to do today, I only have a partial class prepared because I was going over what to do, and I think I've told you most of what I wanted to tell you about Apache Cordova and Vue. I want to do today some examples of how to use plugins that give you access to fun functionality, okay? So I will do that for a few plugins. And then I can talk more about developing in JavaScript. For example, how to use libraries or plugins in JavaScript to do additional things, like graphics or displaying information. There is a lot of JavaScript libraries that you can use. But modulo that, I think that I've told you what I wanted to tell you about Vue. And so from next class on, I'm going to go back to Java, and I'm going to do some things that are interesting and fun and difficult for the end of the class. That is, I want to explain you better how the threading model and the process model of Android works. I want to show you how you can use that for doing animations, by scheduling, for instance, updates to the graphics display. So I want to go a bit on how to draw custom views in which you can draw what you want on the screen. And I want to explain the threading, and if you put the two things together, you can get animation, right? Because you can essentially build views that update themselves at regular intervals, and if you write simple models of how things should move or behave, then you can get animations out of that, okay? And this will also give you insight into how Android internally works, which I think is interesting. And so we will be doing that, and then finally we will be talking about background activities, okay? I will give the last homework on animations and graphics. And I will this year not give a homework on background processes, even though I explain you how they behave, simply because it's a little bit awkward to grade. You know, if you do a process on if you do a homework on background processes, you need to send something to the background, and you need to check that it's really done in the background. And so it's a bit complicated to test. You need to start some activity, then, you know, close it, see whether there is a process in the background, or reopen it, see how the progress is. I mean, it's a bit of laborious grading, which I don't think is quite as much fun as, you know, grading some simple animation game that you can view in front of your eyes, and can be a little bit more fun, actually, right? So that's the plan. So last year, was it last year or the year before? I don't know. But last year I had this simple tomato in the sink game. Your phone was like a sink, and there was a tomato in it, and you had to guide the tomato around obstacles until it went down the drain hole. Don't ask me why, okay, but the tomato is red and visible, and the hole is black, and is a good target, and my fantasy for games is limited. But this year, since we use the emulator, I want to make sure that the game can be done without tilting the phone. Unfortunately, you know, that was a more fun game, I think. So this year I have to invent some variation of some similar game that we can play by clicking around, essentially, or touching the screen. Okay, so that's the idea, essentially, for the rest of the class. I know it's a bit of a disconnected class because I had you know, Android, Java first, then JavaScript, then Java again at the end. But the reason is that I wanted to present the JavaScript framework early enough so that people who wanted to use it in their projects could choose which one of the two to use. There is a little bit of dichotomy. So if you want to use deep access to the phone, the native framework is superior, right? You can do more things in the end. We will see, for example, not only the animation is a little bit better, but also anything that happens in the background is better handled. For example, I was thinking while coming to class about file upload, unless there is a plugin that somebody wrote for Cordova, which is quite possible. But file upload is yet another thing that you can do better in the native framework, because you can essentially, if you search for Android, there is a background file uploader that you can use, so that you give it simply the list of files you want to upload, and these will upload them one by one in the background, letting you know about the progress, but it's all done in the background, so that if you switch to another app, the file upload continues in the back, right? Whereas what we're doing in JavaScript, you know, terminates essentially when you move on to other apps, or at least you have a much coarser control about any long-lasting processing. Okay, so there are clear limitations to JavaScript. One thing I'm curious is your opinion, actually. Some of you saw these two environments for the first time, and I don't know what you thought of the comparative simplicity or beauty of developing in the two different environments. Maybe you should try to do a version of a game like Battleships also in Java to get a taste of how it would work in both of them, right? So there was somebody who posted an image, a very nice image on Piazza, which I haven't quite understood fully. There was somebody looking at a sort of picture portrait. Who was it who posted it? Was it you? No? Okay, no, I don't know. Everybody was looking at you. But at any rate, but it was quite a good picture. But what was the idea? That they were longing for the past days of Android development. And it's really funny because, you know, in a sense, perhaps because I wrote bigger projects, but I was really longing for the simplicity of JavaScript compared to struggling with these super complicated and verbose, I hate verbosity, verbose ways of getting anything done in Java. So I was wondering, you know, is it really true that Android Studio is so much better now? Or is it simply that I haven't given enough complicated homework in Android Studio, and so you haven't figured out how complicated would it be to play tic-tac-toe in Android Studio and Volley. And maybe it's not that complicated, you know. In the past years, in order to do an internet call, you needed to do something more complicated. Threads were not handled for you. So each time you had to essentially spawn your own background thread, give it the task of the thing to do, and it was basically some 50 lines of code just to set up, you know, the way of doing an internet call. Now things have improved, actually. As I mentioned, it's the first year in which I'm really quite happy with Android Studio. You know, nothing has broken. Things work, and some things have become simpler, which is kind of new. Before, in previous editions of the class, everything always became only more complicated. So I'm curious. I mean, is there anyone who had not seen both of them? I mean, who had not seen Java, who is not a previous expert of JavaScript or Android that wants to speak up and give me the experience? It would be very interesting. Anybody who wants to chip in? Like, how did you find it? If you were a newcomer to the settings. Sorry?
About Cordova?
Yeah, about Cordova and about Android Studio. How would you compare them? What was the impression for the class? Because the problem is that I did a lot of both. Enough of Android to know that it's verbose, and enough of Vue to know how to use it in the simplest possible way to get what I want out of it.
I thought Android Studio was a little bit easier to get into because I already knew some Java. I didn't really know much of like HTML, so I didn't really know what was going on in the index.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't done too much JavaScript, but I thought it was cool that Cordova goes across multiple platforms and isn't just for Android.
I see.
I thought that was cool.
Because I think, to me, the main thing I like about Cordova, if it works for what I want, is that I don't need to bother. And this is perhaps why you haven't seen the simplicity. You don't have to bother keeping the screen updated. Once you update your data structures, you are done. And instead, I find that in Java, when I would spend a lot of my time, doing the update myself, because there is no, at least, I'm sure that some people might have written their own frameworks on top of Android Studio. But in Android per se, there is not a framework that essentially watches some data structures and updates the screen automatically. I'm sure some people might have written it.
Yeah, I sort of liked one of the things I liked about JavaScript was that it was more, like the code stuff was more things that you'd do with like regular computer science code, whereas with the Android Studio, you had to deal with like a bunch of weird stuff that was specific to the Android phones and stuff, and like weird classes that weren't necessarily intuitive, whereas with JavaScript it was just like what I've already been doing with other code, but in a little bit different syntax.
Yeah. I mean, yes, I tend to agree because at least, it's more, you get your input and you update your data structures, and there are some gotchas, like the Vue.set, etc. But more of that is sort of more. Other comments?
Sort of how the phone worked and how the phone handled programs specifically. It didn't feel like I was programming very high level, sort of like almost memory management.
I tend to agree. Not memory management level, but yeah, a lot of things are very low level. Like the list view is an example, right? In Vue, they might or might not do something smart, but you don't have to worry about that. And the idea that you have to worry about recycling view classes, in order to be more efficient in the rendering, I mean, who cares, frankly, right? I mean, it should be done somewhere that you shouldn't have to look at it, sort of. I mean, maybe they can give you a high-performance, low-level interface, but we need a a sort of simple-to-use interface that would be nicer. Any other comment? Yeah. So, yeah, and I'm sure that it's possible to write some framework on top of Java that also gives you these automatic screen updates by changing data structures, etc. I don't know, frankly, if it has been done. You know, sometimes by teaching a class, I innovate in some areas, but not in others. And in the meantime, technology is moving, so I don't know if somebody has written a good framework. Does anybody know? I mean, there is a React Native, right? And so, which is a sort of more tailored alternative. So React Native is an alternative to Apache Cordova. Is there anyone who knows deeply about React Native here? Okay, so I haven't used it, okay, but I looked at it a little bit. It's also a JavaScript framework for developing in on top of iOS and Android. The difference compared to Vue is the following: that instead of using generic HTML tags, you use tags that are related to underlying visual classes of Android or iOS, okay? So, for example, you have a tag for the web view, you have a tag for a list view. There is a more direct connection between your tags and the underlying classes, okay? And the other thing is that, well, the syntax is different because React is different from Vue, right? And that's a difficult comparison. Essentially, I think that for simple things, I like Vue better. But Vue has a system of modularity, which I haven't taught to you, which I don't particularly like. And I think that once you go to complicated systems and modularity, React.js might be better. It's only that most of the work I do in the end is not very complicated. Most of the work I do on the web is more, you know, produce some clean, nice working pages that actually are not very super complicated visually. And so for that, you know, Vue has worked very well for me. But there is no end to the number of these frameworks. And so the problem of React Native is simply that being more tailored to the graphical interface primitives of each phone system, it's a little bit less transferable from Android to iOS. It's a little bit harder to have a single code base. Okay. Now, what I don't like of Android of Cordova, Apache Cordova, is the debugging. I think it's very easy to debug as long as you are on a phone. As long as you're on the browser, because you can set, breakpoints. You can basically do whatever you want. It's very pleasant. I also think it's very messy to debug the code once you push it to a phone, because you have much coarser control. I mean, Android Studio at least integrates very well with the debugger and with the emulator. But the integration is much coarser on Android, on Apache Cordova. And so, if you are doing a project that uses Apache Cordova and you cannot test it on the browser, rather than going through complete hoops and test it on the phone directly, what I would recommend is that essentially you make mock-ups of what you can do only on the phone to be able to prototype on the browser. For example, I'll show you now how to get the location or get the accelerometer data on Apache Cordova. And if I were to test it on the browser only, what I would do is essentially make fake implementations of these that, spit out reasonable data, maybe out of a data file or whatever, right? But in such a way that you can test it on the you can test the behavior on the browser where you have full control and you can inspect all the variable values. And then you switch it, when you deploy on a phone, instead of the mock-up, you use a real thing. To this end, by the way, there is one particular plugin. Okay, let me talk about plugins. So let me start the more official part of the class. So I'm here in a branching with Git branch. I'm here in the master branch. Wait. Oh, yeah. But there is a sensors branch that you can go look at, and it's already pushed to the repository. Okay, so the examples I will be doing today are in that in the sense of branch of the Cordova sample app. So you can always list, let me make it bigger, you can always list the plugins you have, okay? And you can see that I have quite a few installed, probably too many. I have the Cordova, let me describe them a moment. So the simplest one is Cordova plugin device. This is a plugin that gives you information about the device you're running on, okay? And this is very useful exactly to do the mock-up work that I was mentioning, okay? The way I would write the code is that I would ask on which device I am, and if I am on the browser, I would mock up the location services, and if I'm on a phone, I would actually use the real ones. Actually, let's do that today as an example on top of what I have already prepared. I think it will be a good example, okay? So then I have a compat plugin that I don't know what it is. I didn't install it, and I think it's standard. Maybe for compatibility with all the devices, I'm not quite sure. Device motion and geolocation, I added them because I wanted to give examples in class about how to use that. Camera, I added it. I originally wanted to show you how to use the camera, but then I read the documentation and it's a little bit long, and I thought it was slightly boring. But so I want to essentially tell you how that you can do it, but not really do it as an example. Okay. And then there is, let's see, there is a Cordova plugin console. This I added it yesterday, and it seems to make things a little bit better in debugging. So the problem is this: when you run Cordova on a phone, how do you know what's going on, right? And it's not that easy. But via that plugin, if I do a console log, the console log would spit it out, to the JavaScript console, except that if I'm running on the phone, I cannot directly look at the JavaScript console, right? That's the problem. That's one of the problems. The problem is that by not looking at the JavaScript console, the errors are silent, so I don't really see what's going wrong. But at least, if I, with the help of this plugin, if I do a console log, I will see the log output also in the logcat of the Android device monitor. It's something that I have to demo to you how this works, okay? But I will demo it for you. So it's essentially used to transfer the console log from the embedded console in the devices you have connected in debugger mode to the output you can actually look at, okay? And then I have this whitelist plugin, which I don't know what it is. I think it came with a basic installation of Cordova, and I can figure out what it does, but I don't know. I mean, I simply let it be without that. Or did I touch it? I don't know. What does it do? Can one of the TAs check what does it do? Some of these things are there because I was playing with Apache Cordova for a while, and then you forget which plugins you have. Once you have a list of plugins, so how do you install a plugin? So you do things like Cordova plugin add Cordova plugin camera. So you can add plugins. And it's very important once you add plugins to say something like Cordova plugin save. Okay? So because there are two different processes. One is the process of adding the plugin. And the other is the process of essentially saving your list of plugins to this config.xml file. Okay? I don't quite know why the two might go out of sync, but whatever the design idea was, when you add a plugin, apparently config.xml is not necessarily updated unless you do this Cordova plugin save. So it's important that you do that, because otherwise, if you check in your project and somebody else checks it out, if the list of the plugins that are mentioned in config.xml are installed automatically when you try to build. But if a plugin is not mentioned there, that doesn't happen. And so, your colleague working with you on your project may get errors in build. I mean, they're not very complex errors, but did you look at...
configuration.
But why is it their standard, or did I add it without knowing? It's already there. Yes, so I simply didn't use it because I didn't have anything to do. And then there is a special one which is actually useful, and it's called Cordova Custom Config. So you know from the beginning of class that you can play with the manifest of an application in order to add special information. For example, what are the ways to launch it? Or if you want to have any special icons or special things. I mean, suppose you need to touch the manifest. If you want to touch the manifest, then you can add the Cordova custom config, and there is a certain syntax to specify what to do on each platform, okay? I'm doing it in the project, so I guess you can look at what I'm doing. But, for example, in this project, there is this... okay, if you look at my config.xml, it contains this stuff that is completely useless for most of you, which is simply a leftover from an application that I'm building with some students, okay? So I should have erased it, actually. But this platform name is equal to Android, and platform names is equal to iOS, okay? This is my instructions on how to modify the configuration in order to work on particular platforms, okay? And so what I'm saying here is this. Look, if your platform is Android, please... you see, there is that config file, parent is equal to dot, target is equal to Android manifest.xml. I'm essentially telling it, please, in that, if you are running on Android, do this particular patch to this particular configuration file. And it's flexible, right? I mean, the language is a bit brutal. You cannot be as fine as you cannot be as finessed as you want in the things you can add. But you can essentially say. Throw in this particular XML in addition to the normal XML of these other configuration files, okay? And so that's what I'm using. What I'm trying to do for Android, since you can read the manifest, you can look at it, is that I'm adding some intent filters, okay? What I'm trying to do with some students is making sure that if I share a URL, my Cordova app can intercept the sharing of the URL and can present itself as an app with which the URL can be shared, right? So I told you that in order to implement sharing in this way, you need to capture the intent via an intent filter in the manifest. This I mentioned it in the first part of the class, if you remember, right? The problem is that now I need to tell Apache Cordova to please build a manifest that contains the appropriate filters, okay? Otherwise, this capturing doesn't happen. And so what I'm saying is something like this. If the target is the Android manifest, and then I have to give an entire stanza, an entire paragraph that is put into this config file. Okay? And so this contains the whole activity declaration together with the various intent filters that I want to have. Okay? You see, there is an intent filter for action send, category default, category browsable, for a scheme that is HTTP. This captures sharing of HTTP URLs. And then there is another action send, default browsable for HTTPS. So those are the two things I capture. And you see that it's quite silly, but I have to specify again that I have this Android intent action main and category launcher, right? This is stuff that is already in the manifest. The problem is only that when I create a manifest, we use this plugin for the special configuration, the control is not good enough for me to say add this piece to to the configuration file, okay? I can only replace a piece with another piece. So this piece that I tell it to put in is essentially replacing the application tag, okay? It will replace the entire application tag. And so I need to repeat even boilerplate stuff that would have been there if I hadn't decided to use the special configuration, okay? Okay, so how do you use plugins? Well, first you add them. Okay. Actually, can I ask a favor a moment? Can you get me a glass of water? I'm sorry, if you don't mind, just for the things. Okay, one moment, let me go to the code. Oh, it was here already. So I built an incredibly simple index.html in which all I say is my location is and acceleration. The divs are conditional. I have two Boolean variables, has position and has acceleration. And then I just put out the values of the acceleration and position, okay? So the code is very simple there. How does the JavaScript work? The JavaScript is also quite simple and works in this way. I have two, so this is very similar to what you do in Android, right? When you ask for sense of information, because JavaScript cannot wait, just like your UI thread cannot wait, what you do is that you define some listeners to updates to the data. These functions will be called when a new value of position or when a new value of acceleration becomes available, okay? And so what you do is that you define the listeners and then you make sure that you trigger the creation of updates. So my listeners are very simple. Self on acceleration is a listener for the acceleration. It gets some data and sets self vo acceleration x is equal to data.x. How do I know that this is the right assignment to do? Because when you look at the documentation of the accelerometer, this is the outdated version. Sorry, device motion is the new version, okay? It's Cordova plugin device motion, the one I'm using. And so if you look at the documentation here, you see that the function on success gets an acceleration, and you have components x, y, z, and a timestamp that I don't bother about, okay? So what I do here is that I define this method to receive an acceleration value, and this method to receive a position value, okay? And I trigger these two methods in slightly different ways, basically to in fact, let me do it a little bit better, okay? One second only. Okay, this I like it a little bit better. Now let me tell you what I'm doing. So the only thing that typically bites you when you try to use these plugins is this. Many of these plugins, even the ones that don't do anything strange, like give you access to the file system, etc., they're not available when you parse the JavaScript for the first time. So when the Vue object is created and you execute a self is equal to new Vue, etc., typically the plugin system is not ready to run yet, okay? That's a little bit of a small annoyance, but it's not very, very large. Now, this part that I wrote a long time ago and we never had to worry about comes into play of receiving the on-device ready, okay? Let's look at how it works. So there is this initialize function. So let me maybe go from the beginning. when this is the line that runs everything. It defines app by instantiating all the code, right, and assigning the value of self to app. And then I call app initialize. Okay? When I call app initialize, what I do is that I run this function that adds. Thank you. Sorry. I add this function that listens to the device ready event and calls self on device ready. Device ready is an event launched by Cordova to exactly say that the plugin system is now ready to run. Okay? So when this is received, then I do these options, and this is the first time in which you really, for the first time, can use your plugins and are guaranteed that they will work if you haven't made other errors. Okay? So what happens if you make a mistake is the following, that you may use a navigator accelerometer you may call methods of navigator accelerometer, etc., and you get an error that says something strange, such as, warning, watch accelerator method of accelerometer is not defined. Or perhaps, warning, accelerometer method of navigator is not defined. But essentially some of this stuff is not defined. And the reason is that the plugin system is not running yet. What happens, for the plugin system is this, to give you a sort of better breakdown of what happens. Cordova is creating this web view in which the code runs, right? Then the web view is created and starts to load index.html, which causes it to load index.js, right? And so that part is getting ready via the browsing that happens in the web view. Asynchronously, in the Java thread of Apache Cordova that created the web view, you are running other code, right? You are running some Java code that is saying something like add the JavaScript interface, in which it's adding the JavaScript interfaces of your plugins to the JavaScript so that your plugins can be accessed from the JavaScript. Okay, we have seen that code when we were doing the work on WebView, right? And so the two things are essentially running asynchronously, and this device ready event is there in order to notify one part that the other part is also ready. Okay? What happens if you try to access a straight navigator accelerometer watch acceleration without waiting for the device ready event? Is that the JavaScript interface may not be set up yet, and so things may not be defined yet. Okay, so that's the problem essentially, and it's a very subtle error. I mean, I made it yesterday while preparing the class because you have used that. In software, when you declare a library, the library is available. When you code in Python or in C or in Java, if you import a library import or what are the statements in Java? Also import. So if you import stuff, then the stuff is available immediately. You don't have to wait until the import terminates and an event is generated. But in this case, it's done in that way. Okay. So what am I doing? I'm doing it in two different ways. For the accelerometer, I say there are various ways. You can either get the acceleration value once only, or you can define an acceleration watcher, which is very similar to the Android method of attaching a listener to the sensor manager and start receiving updates, right? So I wanted to watch acceleration. When I get a success value, I call self on accel. When I get a failure on error, so if there is some error in getting the acceleration, I call null, so I don't do anything, right? That's the way to say that you don't want to handle it, so you just don't care. And I pass it to self options, and self options is the frequency of the updates. Maybe I should make it a little bit higher just to have a tiny bit more fun. Instead, to get to the location, I use another mechanism, just for the fun of it. But I'm saying essentially set interval. Set interval is one of the two JavaScript functions that cause delayed execution. Okay, set interval causes a function to execute periodically at a certain interval, okay? And let's say every 2000 milliseconds, so every 2 seconds, run self-get location. And self-get location simply says, I log that I'm getting the position, and this is a bit funny. I don't know why this got broken in this way. Okay, this is better indentation. And so I say navigator geolocation, get current position. I pass it to the success method. I pass the error method. And I pass, some options. So, it's very similar to the other call, but here I manage the interval myself, okay? In JavaScript, there is a set interval and set timeout. Set timeout does something once only once the timeout has elapsed. Set interval does it periodically. The only catch with the set interval, as I mentioned, is that set interval does not guarantee that there is only one outstanding call to the function that you run periodically, okay? So if I do a set interval of 1 second, run a function f, if the function f lasts, or if the activity caused by calling that function f lasts for more than 1 second, you may have more than one simultaneously occurring execution. I mean, you should never have long code execute in JavaScript directly, okay? But for example, if these methods you call cause background execution, as when you do an Ajax call or when you call a plugin that will give you back the acceleration value, you could have multiple outstanding calls. This is why in the game I don't use set interval, even though it would have been the obvious way in order to periodically ping the server. I mentioned this in class, right? Instead of doing that, I do a set timeout each time I get an answer. Each time I get, in fact, the Ajax method is completed. This avoids having multiple ones at the same time. In this case, I simply decided I don't care. I was hoping this situation would arise rarely, and it's not that incredibly bad if I try to get 2 locations simultaneously. There is no big concurrency issue I can see, right? I will simply get 2 updates at, some perhaps very close intervals, but nothing really breaks that I can see, and so I decided not to bother, okay? And so this works. So let's try to run it to see the behavior. And so I can run it in 2 different ways. Wait, where do I run it? I can try to run it on the browser. Okay. Weird. I mean, the location, I understand it. I gave permission to the browser window to access my location. You see that, right? So Chrome, this page is tracking my location, and so this is my location as best as is known to my browser. Okay? The acceleration, however, I really didn't think it would be working. Yeah, maybe a simulated value. It's strange because yesterday I wasn't receiving any updates. So I'm kind of surprised that today I get updates to the... Let me see a moment. Let me rerun it and Well, where did it go? Okay. Okay, so this is the mistake I was telling you about that I was making yesterday, right? This is an example of of a bug I made while developing the code. Cannot read property get the current acceleration of undefined. This was me trying to read the acceleration without waiting for the device ready event. Now let's look here. I can click on Inspect. I can look at the JavaScript console. And it's actually receiving an acceleration value. I just don't know where it comes from. Okay, so that's very nice. It helps me test the code. Okay? And now you can run it on a phone. I think I can just leave it running there. Well, I need to stop this, but it will continue running there. You can also run these on a phone, okay? And I show you how it looks like from the point of view of what you have to do on the computer in order to see what's going on. So okay, here I have a phone connected, which you don't see, but is it me? No. Okay, one thing I do is Cordova run Android list. Wait. Oh, very nice, okay. Let's try again. Okay, fine. So the virtual device I have running is giving me an error and I don't know why. Okay, so I have this device that doesn't seem to work. I think it's just a glitch of that virtual device, and if I launch it again, it might work. Let me try actually. Let me try to sort of start from scratch. So suppose I go in Android Studio as an easy way, and then I try to launch. So this is the Android Virtual Device Manager. Okay, and I can launch as Nexus 5. Let's see whether relaunching it will make it work. So now I have both my phone connected. Oh, this is a bit unfortunate. They're both Nexus 5. Fine. But I'll have both a phone connected and my emulator. Let's wait until this boots. Okay. Okay, so you see I have a funny glitch. I don't quite know why. This used to work and broke in the meantime. Perhaps it's due to an update. I would have to search why. But essentially I have difficulties running on an Android emulator rather than on my Android phone. Okay, it is able to find this Android device. And this didn't used to happen, so I would have to Google out this error to figure out what is it. Did you find anything on this particular error? No. Have you Googled it or not? There is nothing. Okay. Is some kind of glitch that I don't know what it is. But I don't care so much. I have the other target available. And so when you run Android, you can specify which target you want. And in this case, no, that's the way you specify in case you have multiple targets. And again, if I didn't have that mistake, here it would list available Android virtual devices, and it would list, some similar ID for my virtual device. In this case, I say that I want to run it on the phone. This is going to do the build. The build is a slow build because, I don't know, the configuration changed, so it has to rebuild the project from scratch. takes some. Okay, now it's installing it. And now finally, okay, now the same thing is running on my phone, which is, small for you to see, obviously, right? But it's the same thing that I had on the screen, and it's running, and this time the acceleration is the real one. I think I could project it if I wanted. But more than this, I want to tell you, how do you debug this kind of thing? Okay, so once the thing is running on the phone, you can do the following. You can go in Android Studio. Sorry. Hey, where is my Android Studio? Okay. And you can go. You can choose which phone to look at. Come on, don't crash. Wait. Okay, so I clicked on the Android monitor for the... Interesting, it seems I have two emulator processes running in the background, okay? So this is the dump of everything that is ever happening on my phone. Okay, and what I can do is that I can search only for... you see, my application is called Org Crowd Census News Census. Again, it's a leftover, but that was a package name I had, is leftover from some work I was doing. So if I filter by these, I will start to see only the logs. I'm sure, let me try to see if I can magnify the font, but I don't seem I can do that. And now I can filter, these are the logs from the phone. There are too many logs because I have a lot of applications running on a real phone. You can filter them in various ways. You know that there is a, in this case I can filter it by the app name, okay, and I see the logs that I'm printing out. You see, this receiving acceleration is the log I'm doing in JavaScript, right? And due to the plugins, I see that this is info from console, and the source is this file Android assets www.js index.js. So these are the logs that are being produced by my index.js, okay? I can at least look at these logs, okay? This is what I can do. I don't know, and I don't seem to be able to do step by step into my JavaScript code. Okay, so the ability that you had to connect to the browser, these I don't know that it is impossible, but I haven't found any help on how to do that. So I wouldn't know whether it's possible. I don't know whether you can attach yourself to the debugger of the web app in such a way that you can step through your Cordova code line by line, as you can do when you run it on the browser. Okay, it might be possible. If it is, I would be interested in knowing, because yesterday when I was trying to debug my code, I sort of failed to find any solution, and I don't remember ever doing it in the past. So if somebody has written a tool is recent, and I would very much like to know that. Okay, so this is. This is basically how you can do that. Okay, at this point, this is what I wanted to show you for Cordova. Now, is anyone doing a project in Apache Cordova? Would you like me to look at some particular examples? There is one more thing that I can tell you about how to develop in JavaScript that might be useful. Any question on this so far? What would you like to do in this last half hour? I can either give you some, I could let you go for once, we could have a shorter class, but otherwise I can tell you about some ways of mixing Vue development with JavaScript plugins, for instance. We could try to do that. It's up to you, really. Any preference? Do you have a preference? Okay, so to do more, how to mix plugins. So, for example, one of the things that makes JavaScript development nice is that there is a lot of functionality that other people have made for you that you can just import by importing JavaScript libraries. And I don't promise to be successful because it may take more than half an hour, but I can at least show you what are the steps involved in using some of those libraries, okay? Some of the libraries that are most common are, there is a beautiful library called fullcalendar.io for displaying a calendar. There are very nice libraries for doing graphing, right? If you want to show graphs, there is a Google Graphing API that you can use very easily in order to produce graphs out of data. Is any one of you needing either of the two or some other functionality that you might get through libraries? And so I will show you how to try to integrate them in an app. Any one of you doing the project that needs any of these? No. Okay, what would you like me to try to do? Include some Google Charting API for Google Charts or the calendar? Charts? Okay, let's do the charts. So I haven't prepared it, so you have to help me a little bit search around. But, why not? It's like a fun exercise to do. So let me remove my phone. Actually, not, because my phone is almost discharged. So, but let's stop paying attention to my phone a moment, okay? And so what I do is git checkout master, okay? I go back to a good starting point. Oh. Okay, I check out master. I make a new branch that I call charts. Okay, and so this gives me a nice starting point with the Vue app and not so much else going on. So let's see. Let's take a look at the documentation. Fine, this is still running, I don't care. But let us look together at the documentation for Google Charts. And there is just one, okay, Google Charts, but there is also D3 that contains beautiful libraries. Is any one of you an expert of D3? No. You are? Do you think I should use D3 instead, and would you be able to help me through a simple example? Yeah, okay, well, let's look at it a moment, okay? So, chart gallery, okay? So we can decide what to do. There are many area charts, pie charts. We want to look at... so what we want to do an exercise tracker with some line charts. Okay. So suppose we want to do something like this. Let's look at the source code. Okay. Great. So it seems that it works like this from the code. So let me just magnify a bit so that you can see, okay? So it's actually the first time I see it, not in absolute, but in a long time. So I'm learning with you. It's a nice exercise. So you see, there are two pieces of it apparently, okay? We need to load the load the JavaScript of the charts, there are two ways of doing it, okay? So we can load it from the cloud, as in this way, or else for a Cordova app, what I would do is that I would download that thing and actually load it statically from the phone. I believe that that will work as well, okay? I don't know whether... so, of course, you know, when you load a JavaScript library, I don't know if it will ping Google to pass secret data or without jokes, whether it will call Google to ask for other libraries. I would have to check that all the JavaScript I need is there. It's not guaranteed. I simply hope that that's the case, okay? So let me try to do the second step, that is to download these into some place, okay? So that I can load it locally and we can chart our exercise even if we are off the grid, okay? What do? I go here. I go in my Cordova app, okay? I go to the www directory, okay, I go to the JavaScript directory, and here I do wget of this URL. Let's see if I can simply get it in this way, okay? Error. Yes, so there is an HTTPS error, so I need to do... it tells me no check certificate. You know, I'm doing this essentially so I have this vague feeling that this won't help, because I have this vague feeling because Google generally believes that if you use their products, you're always on the connected. I have the feeling that for Google Charts, even if I download this locally, it will still try to load everything up from the cloud. So this is just a loader that will load the specific library you want to use. I just have this bad feeling, okay, that we may want to use different libraries if we want to be able to do things entirely locally, okay? But let me still add this library to Git and see if we can make it work. I mean, it will work for us because my laptop is connected. But we will see in the network traffic that I think it will be loading other JavaScript. Are you checking whether that's the case? I think it will be the case. Okay, fine. Let me load my JavaScript. Okay, so I cut and paste from here to my... okay, I put it... I don't know where to put it, but for example... well, let me put it before index.js, okay? So, and since I downloaded it, this becomes simply jsloader.js, okay? Another thing, and this is important trick, is that I have to define where the chart appears, okay? And this is the only real sort of point of conflict because of this. I'm creating a page that has essentially two masters. There is Vue that believes it controls a portion of the page, the Vue div. And now there will be Google Charts that believes it will control another portion of the page, which is the div for the charts. If you look at the documentation, I have to create a chart div in which the charting occurs. Okay? Hey, come on. Well, come on. Okay, so it was simply a bug. So these two divs in general will tend to fight each other if I put them in one inside the other, okay? So the temptation is to put the chart div inside the Vue div. Funny things may happen. So the one difficult thing when you do these mix-ups of different types of code is to manage the interaction. It's very easy if they do not overlap on the page. I like Vue among frameworks because unlike other things like Angular, etc., it doesn't try to capture your whole interaction with the word, and you can confine its effects to a portion of the page you are displaying, right? But in this case, we are somewhat limited to the way we can use Vue, because we are essentially saying the chart is on top and the Vue controlled layout is below that, okay? And that sort of, restricts the layout flexibility we have, but we are going to live with it so far. And then I take this code, and as it is, I'm going to put it somewhere. Okay, I don't know where, but it's just a declaration of a function, so we can likely put it anywhere. So let me decide to put it here, okay? Okay, and now there is this piece of code. So once I define the function, this is the small amount of magic code. Okay, so you see, this will cause a load from the cloud essentially. So there would be a. So I think it's actually Google Charts may not be the best library to use from Apache Cordova, frankly. Sorry?
It's against their terms of services to download.
Okay, so fine. So I'll have to use this one. So, okay, don't use Google Charts. Okay, but since now I'm trying to use them, let me use them for one example, and then maybe move to something more reasonable like D3. Okay, there is unfortunately this assumption that you are always connected in some of the products. Even Google Maps for the longest time would not work unless you were connected. Okay, so let me abide by the terms of service and git remove loader.js, so we don't even check it in. Okay. And since we are going to do something different soon, so when do I do this is my only problem. Maybe let's do it when the device is ready. I don't think it really matters, but why not? Okay. This might work. Let's see whether it works. So let me run it on the browser. Oops. Just. Google is not defined. So let me look at the documentation one moment. Sorry? Oh. Yeah, so this is my fault. Okay, and so I have to essentially let's look at this error which happens often. Refused to load this script because it violates the following content security policy directive. Default search self, except script search. Okay, so the problem is that here I have this content security policy that is incorrect. Okay, this I had fixed it in another app. So in order to be super lazy, because we are in a hurry, I just wanted to show you one fix. So I go to Bitbucket. Actually, I have it here. I go to the Cordova Starter app. I look at the source code of the branch tic-tac-toe. Here I also have to do generic server calls. So if I remember correctly, I had implemented a very liberal policy. Okay, and so actually, well, let me copy it and then adapt it. So let's see what I had written for the game without actually telling you that I had done it. Okay, but this is the one I have for the game, in which I say that the content is the default source, style source, and then I have this URL. So so for script source, what if I just put a star? Okay. Let me try to run it again. Arg. Okay, so I'm missing some permissions. Okay, let me try this way. Sorry. And now it works. Okay. And once this is done, the difficulty would be, how do you modify data from Vue? Okay, so let's look at it. We are creating this variable data, which is a data table. Okay, this I think is a good exercise in JavaScript in any case. We are adding rows to this table, and then at the end we are saying chart draw data options. Okay, so let's look at, let's imagine that now the data that we have, we don't get it via a fixed table, but we get it, as part of the rest of the Vue code, but maybe by doing some Ajax call that gets the data. The point is, how do I feed it back inside this object? Okay, so if I knew that I had the chart, then I could do what I wanted, right? So if I had this chart object, you see, this chart object is the one that is tied to the chart div. So I have to essentially export it and make it known to the rest of the app that I'm writing. And the only problem is that this function that I'm writing here, function draw axis sticks colors, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't let any of the values it defines inside be known outside. Okay, so that's sort of the slight problem I have. Okay, so how to solve it? I'm not quite sure, but there are some ways. For example, one simple way would be something like this. So here is the chart, so that I can attach other data to it. Okay, and I can say self chart is equal to null. Okay, so I'm defining essentially a chart attribute of the self object, which is the one I will export in the app and is available throughout. And I'm simply saying that this is not equal to anything. And now, when I'm inside here, instead of saying var chart, there is no reason why I should be doing this. I can say self chart, right? I don't see any reason why this would not work. And so this will give me access to the data from outside. Okay? So now, just as an exercise, let me add a button to the page that will replace the data with some other data. It's a sort of exercise in controlling from a different place, okay? It seems that the minimal app is working, and here I say button, new data, okay? And v on click is equal to set new data, okay? And so methods set new data, set new data. Okay, so now I have this method for setting new data that, when I click the button, it should do that. And so I can say something like this, set new data is equal to function, okay, and here I have access to this self-chart object, okay? So what I can do, because I don't want to do an Ajax call, I just want to do a quick example, is this. You see, this is where I define the new data. This is what I should do when I do an Ajax call, right? So if I do an Ajax call, I should essentially get the filling for this. But instead of doing an Ajax call, I just pretend that... okay. But in order to create some difference, I just take some of this data and, shuffle it randomly. Okay, just so that the chart will look different. I hope that doing this will be just fine, okay? So I give it a good shuffle, and then I say exactly what I say here, because the chart should already exist. Maybe I can check it, okay, to be cleaner. So if self chart is not null, okay, I mean it should be because you're able to draw the button, so I assume that the events have already happened, but whatever. And so if this is true, draw data options. Okay, so these options are a bit awkward, right? Because but let me also make them static in this way. So I can say self options is equal to these. To be completely clean, I think I prefer to say, but this is more or less only my style. It's not necessary to say self options is equal to null here, okay? It's only my preference. I mean, my preference would actually be different, okay? There is no reason why I should... let's do it better. Otherwise, this is just static stuff, right? And so there is no reason it should be defined inside here, inside this funny function. It should really happen here. Okay? Let me fix up the... No, sorry, I need to delete these and then I can fix up the indentation. Okay? Voila. This seems better, okay? Because, I mean, self-options should be defined once and for all, come on. And it's better to define it outside. So here I have to draw these with self-options, I guess, no? And now I can draw these with self-options, and this should work. Of course, it may not. But if I'm moderately lucky, this might. Okay, so the first thing is running, and then I click on new data, and I get a whole mess, no? Because I evidently swapped not only the xy's, but also the I also swapped the values for the temporal axis. So this thing is zooming back and forth, right, in the plotting. You see, you're supposed to give values of time that are increasing, but because of the hacky way in which I just swapped around these numbers, also the time axis got corrupted, okay? But the proof of concept is that. So the difficulty in having these libraries, and we could do other libraries, but the story is basically always the same. It's a little bit of... the one challenge is to make the library and Vue communicate properly. Each one of the two are born to believe that, sorry, let me just switch off the... each one of the two is born to believe that they are the only game in town, okay? And you need to tell them to communicate gracefully. This means something like this. Some of it is, making the variables... Sorry? Oh, it's my phone. I see. Wow, what an effect. So, some of it is making the variables known from the library to Vue, okay? Another thing that I don't believe I can demonstrate easily in this case, but is evident if you use fullcalendar.io, is that you need to capture events that happen in the... What is it? you need... No, the mute didn't work. Yeah. And of course, now I have friends that are chatting. Actually, his colleagues is about work, but come on. I mean, the phone is here, okay? What is going on? Okay, maybe this works. Yes. Okay. The other challenge is capturing events. For example, fullcalendar.io has a way to use, say, drag and drop or click, so that when you click in specific places in the calendar, it gives you an event that you can receive that tells you which day you have clicked, so to say. So the point is, how do you receive those events? And the answer is, I don't remember, but no, I remember. What I did is unfortunately a slightly complicated thing. So I had to use some lines of jQuery. Okay? So let me pretend to try to write some of the code that this would do. Let me first do a commit, because what I'm going to do from now on is a bit experimental. Okay, now let me show you how capturing events can be done. So my idea is this, and maybe I'm doing something silly. Okay, but the fact is that there is a way to attach an event listener from JavaScript, from jQuery. for example, I could say, I don't know that you can click on charts, okay? But let me try to make, so there is this charts div on which I can still click. Let me see where it is, chart div, okay? So, chart div, JavaScript wizards, please help me, okay? But, so here I'm locating that element and adding a click listener, okay? And when I click on this, is my syntax correct? This is a function that I attach to it, okay? What do I want to do in this function? I want now, here I'm outside of my Vue, right? Here I'm using pure jQuery outside of it. And so what I want to do is that when something happens inside, I want to somehow let Vue know. Most of the work you do is wiring together two things that don't know about each other. So here I'm saying, you know, I have this thing called app, which is self. So I can say app like clicked, okay, in which I now define, actually, since I already have a listener for a function, right, I can have app set new data, okay? So I'm calling this function set new data that is defined as part of app. So in this case, what I've done, if this works, is that when I click on the chart itself, jQuery will receive the click event and will route it back to this Vue function, okay? So that's what I'm doing. So, I mean, it's a silly trick in this case, but it shows you how to tie the two things up together, right? Let me see whether this works. So, I'm restarting the browser. And now I should obtain the new data also if I click on the div, chart div, which should be here, right? So if I click yes, it actually works, okay? So, so this is how you do it. Part of the trick that I showed you at the beginning of class of defining this app variable is exactly this. You want that whatever you do in Vue be accessible from outside via this app object that you define. And so when you wire things up together, sometimes, you know, Vue is not sufficient. Vue is done in order to control what is the Vue domain, just like charts control its own chart. So you need to do a tiny bit of gluing together, and what I generally use is jQuery. And if you wonder about this strange click function, you can look it up in jQuery and read all the documentation. We are out of time, but just 1 second. Here, like... jQuery click event, and you can read all the various jQuery event methods there is a click handler and there is a non-handler, and there are various examples of how to deal with events. Okay? The generic handler is an on handler. So so if you look at events, we should be able to find. This is not event handler. Yeah. jQuery has a absolutely horrible documentation in such a way that I can only Google it, but I can never navigate. Okay. The on is the most generic jQuery way of attaching listeners, because you can essentially specify and with full freedom to which div element you attach and which event you want to handle, okay? So that's how you tie things together. Okay, thank you.